right. Thank you so much for being here, Russell.
Thanks for having me, James. Good to see you.
Same here. And I have been going through the whole process of thinking through what I wanted to share through one quick point. Big program theme throughout all of it is reflection. And as I was reflecting on what we might want to share and talk about together, a big piece that I kept coming back to, a big theme I kept coming back to, was this idea of mission. Before we get into that, though, I'd love to give people an opportunity to hear a little bit about who we have here and tell a little bit about origin stories. So there are going to be a few questions I want to ask, and then we'll jump into that larger conversation if you're good with that.
No, it sounds good. And first, I want to thank you for having me. And I want to use this opportunity to thank you for having me again because I think it's been probably 10 or so years, maybe 12 years, where you interviewed me, I believe, for an article you did for Black Enterprise. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So,
That is
so I've been in Black Enterprise because of you many,
correct.
many years ago. And I want to thank you for that and just almost 20-year history that we've had going back to George Washington University in DC. And so this is great to
Isn't that crazy? Okay, so as we talk about origin stories,
I got to start with our origin story,
hey,
right?
right? Okay, so if we're taking it back, all the way back. The question I want to start with is, who is Russell? However you choose to answer that.
Man, I mean, I think the first identity that's been solidified for me very much so in recent years is my identity as a follower of Jesus Christ. So I have to start there. Certainly, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a communicator. I'm a convener. Someone who's, I think, blessed to have a gift for discernment and strategy, and someone who's a galvanizer. We're bringing people together to execute and be on mission. So, very blessed to have been given a skill set. Also, I'm a fifth generation business owner. Happen to be African American, so but regardless of race, to be a fifth generation American business owner, certainly been unique. And as I get older, I realize the unique perspective I had growing up around many people in my family who owned and operated businesses at varieties of scales. And going back to my great great grandfather who escaped slavery in Central Tennessee, learned the trade of blacksmith and had a U.S. patent in 1888 and owned his own farm and his own blacksmith shop in upstate New York. So, just blessed to stand on the shoulders of a tremendous legacy, be part of an amazing family, an amazing American story. I'm descended from a free African that fought in the American Revolutionary War. And so when I have all this history to really inform how I think about today, it really gives me a lot to pull from to be a resource and a problem solver, and to be a blessing for the people I have the chance to serve.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing so much of that and touching on history, which we'll get to because next question I want to understand is where you're from.
I was born in Washington, D.C. Now, my mother's from Harlem, so I have New York roots that way. And then my father grew up in West Baltimore, and they met in college. And I was born right before my father's last season. He played 4 seasons for the Dallas Cowboys and then played here for the team that's now known as the Washington Commanders. And I was born here in D.C. And grew up. My parents were later divorced, and I grew up between Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside of literally a couple blocks from the D.C. line, and West Baltimore. And so certainly, was kind of been a DMV person before there was such a term. Grew up rooting for then the Redskins, and now the Commanders, and then the Orioles, and that was my life very much spanned the quarter of '95, where I knew my way around Baltimore and DC pretty much equally well throughout my life, and had could get with the Baltimore house music and the DC go go, and went to parties where they were either one where they were both growing up, and so been blessed to have a breadth of perspective. Growing up here in this area, went to college up in Connecticut, lived in Boston for about a year. Was in Boston on the day of September 11th, 2020. 2001, 9/11, as it's known. And so, dating myself a little bit, but have been blessed to be back here and be in Maryland, for my whole life, and have deep historic roots here, particularly in Baltimore on both sides of my family. And so, that's where I'm from. I'm a Maryland guy through and through.
Okay, well, all right. So Maryland guy through and through, and good to kind of get that trajectory because pretty much Northeast corridor guy. So while you were
Yeah.
in college in Boston, I was in high school in New Hampshire,
Okay.
uh, and so that was a little bit interesting. On we talk about 9/11 and in that
Right.
period of time,
Right.
but when we start to think about okay, where we're from, I'm a New Yorker. We wear it on our chest. I
Yeah.
have to start reconciling because the time in New York versus the time in this area is starting to balance in another
Right.
direction.
Yeah. I often would tease my mother about this. You're not a New Yorker anymore. You left at 18. You already went back. You can't be a New Yorker. She just looked
And,
at
and just like, all right, so I feel like we always going to be a New Yorker. We always
me.
got to
Right.
hold that tight. But part of the question I think you started to get into is, okay, so where are your people from? Because you have deep roots
Mm,
in Baltimore. You kind of got the trajectory up into New York and then all the way
mm,
back to Tennessee.
mm.
And for the broader kind of range of your family, is that where you kind of reside? You claim Baltimore as the hub,
Well,
or are people?
certainly most of my known ancestors, the largest quantity were in Baltimore.
Okay,
So my mother's grandfather was one of the first 30 or so African American attorneys in the state of Maryland. His mother
nice.
was a white Irish immigrant. His father was a skipjack from Virginia. We don't know a whole lot about as much about him.
Hmm.
So he was a biracial black person, attorney in Jim Crow. But so people say you're from Northeast, yeah, but Maryland was below the Mason-Dixon line. Maryland was a segregated Jim Crow state in my grandfather's time. My grandfather was born in 1919. My great grandfather, I think, was born in the 1880s. And so he was one of the first black attorneys. And so that certainly colors my history. Then on the other side of my family, I have my grandmother would talk about her grandfather. And she's one of like not, she was one of 9 kids. She has passed away at 97 years old last year. Her grandfather worked in the ice yard and would literally bring a block of ice to the city council so that the city council of Baltimore would have ice for their beer while they were making decisions. And they would talk to him and say, "Why do you like this job? Why are you here?" And they would ask him questions occasionally. He'd get to sit in and hear the conversation of the making decisions about how the city is going to be run. So talk about having deep roots in the city, understanding law, understanding politics, understanding government, understanding how things happen, how things have shaped, how history has shaped this region. Again, I'm blessed to draw deep roots and have other Irish ancestors that I'm aware of, kind of where they came from. Some, have vague stories of others, and certainly know I have African roots through Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, and as I mentioned, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where my great great grandfather escaped slavery by hopping on a Union soldier during the Vicksburg Union train rather. Um, uh, Escaping the plantation, getting on a Union train on the way to upstate New York, and being adopted by a white doctor who helped him learn the trade of blacksmith, who got him someone who taught him a trade. He went on to own his own blacksmith shop. And so it's when you have such a rich perspective. And I
Yes.
mentioned my ancestor whose name was Henry Bakeman, who was a free African that fought in the American Revolutionary War. My family been here a while, and so when I tell that story, I get a lot of blank stares and quizzical looks, and occasionally I'll get some good follow up questions. But again, that certainly informs how I look at the world, how I look at this country, and how I look at business and life. Certainly to understand those roots and have so much awareness of them in such detail.
Well, I mean, I think that's a beautiful thing that you have that information, that awareness, but also too, when you understand the story of your ancestors and how they were so deeply rooted in proximity in that city, not only just being there and being purposeful, but also driving in so many different ways and shapes or form what was happening for
Right.
them, for their community, and for people at large. It's something interesting that I think about because a lot of the ancestry conversations and just the roots conversations tend to kind of go through that lens of, okay, how do we get to the connection of slavery? My family's from the Caribbean, so we know that there's certain lineage there through family conversations, literally griot style, like people telling stories and stories
Right.
and stories,
Mm-hmm.
have some connection to know, okay, at some layer, my great grandfather slash some people say grandfather, white man from Ireland, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's connections to other parts of Europe, and to the point where my aunt actually got invited because she did ancestry and people found each other.
Yep.
To the family reunion in Ireland, like they're having a gathering
I
later
gotta
this
figure
year,
out. I say I gotta go to Ancestry and get one of those. So, cause I
and
would
I
like you.
jokingly
I'm a
tell
few
her,
shades lighter than you, brother. So I ain't hiding. The Irish roots, as they call them.
yes, yes, yes. And so I tell her, I was like, well, let me know if you want to go. I'll go with you. Let's figure out. Let's see what we can piece back together.
Mm,
Because in many ways we have understanding, and both of my parents are from the island of Grenada,
mm,
so the families are there, the roots are there. We understand that, But once you start to get past that, the story gets a little bit muddy. And I would love to kind of get that full tracing back to Africa and understand where we are and all of that, because I think so much comes from the story. So I appreciate you sharing the story and on all that you know.
Yeah.
Um, as we think about how we move that forward, I'm curious, given the fact that you know so much about that, but also, how you grew up, are there any people that stand out on that journey that were really influential in shaping who you are today?
Well, certainly my parents have been amazingly influential. Was blessed to have two sets of grandparents who I think both were married over 60 years before one of them passed. So that having, even though my parents divorced, as I mentioned previously, I was spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and part as a result of that. So having that example, and my grandfathers were both World War II veterans, so certainly have a little bit of that military. One was Navy, one was Army. So take what you want, eat what you take. How to get up in the morning and make your bed and do certain things, right? So there was certain some of that was I got a little bit of that, not as much as my parents got from what I will later learn. But the grandparents aren't as harsh on their grandkids normally. So
Right.
lucky for me, I probably got away with a little bit more when I was with them. But so that certainly had a great impact on me as well. And then even though I didn't get a chance to know him well and spend a lot of time with him, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my late uncle Reginald F. Lewis, who was the first African American to own $1 billion business. And then he in 1987 acquired Beatrice Foods, which at the time was one of the three largest food companies in the world. It
Hmm.
was a very complex transaction over 50 companies in over 30 countries, primarily centered in Europe, but throughout Latin America, Asia, the Pacific, North America. And this is before the euro, so a variety of currencies, right? So again, the complexity is almost mind-boggling. And he was able to get backed by $1 billion by a guy named Mr. Michael Milken, who's still alive. I actually had a chance to see him last summer, which was very nice.
It's
And
amazing.
he backed my uncle for $1 billion to accomplish this deal. And unfortunately, 6 years later, he passed away from brain cancer at age 50. But certainly grew up around an environment like with all these business owners. My father had a law practice that at one point I think had 8 attorneys, a number of which are circuit court judges here in Maryland to this day, that my father actually hired and trained out of law school. And so growing up, I'm not my brother and sister are attorneys, my parents are attorneys. I am not, but nonetheless, I grew up around all these lawyers. My uncle was a lawyer as well, Harvard Law,
There
Uncle
is
Reg.
still
And
time,
so
Russell. There is still
no,
time.
there's not. I have two kids. You mentioned that and a mortgage. No, I did. There is no time for law school at this stage. Again, I can always call my brother and my sister and my dad and my mom, and I often do with legal questions. So I know way too many lawyers to have to go through that pain myself. But nonetheless, it certainly formed and shaped how I think, how I process complexity, and certainly, I'm sure how I see the world as you get older and you become a parent and you go through different situations in life and in business and in marriage, et cetera. You kind of see the goods and the ups and the downs, the pluses and the minuses of your upbringing and what was rooted into you in that way. And so you grow and you learn and you mature and you adjust. But certainly had a number of people really was blessed to have a village that really helped raise me.
Definitely. And the perspectives piece, I think, is key. As you grow, you feel so many things. I'm approaching 40. It's out in the distance, but I'm thinking about it. And when you start to think that your life in that kind of context, what do you want to accomplish? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do differently
Right.
as you look at the years ahead? Part of me starts to think about, okay, what is the purpose? What's the mission? What are the mantras? And I'm curious, do you have any go-to mantras? Do you have any things that kind of guide or sayings that guide your thinking?
Well, my uncle's saying has, his saying that he's known for is keep going no matter what. And I've always held on to that, throughout obstacles. One of the favorite poems in our family, my mom's side and my dad's side, was Langston Hughes' "My Life Ain't Been No Crystal Stair," right? And
Hmm.
so, kind of growing up with that mentality, but also more recently learning sometimes there is a time to stop. Keep going no matter what. You don't want to do it. Keep going at the cost of your health. You don't want to keep going at the cost of your marriage. You don't want to keep going at the cost of the investment you're putting into your children, who you have a responsibility to. And so there's certain things that you have to moderate, right? There's certain times where that applies, but there's certain times where you have to make choices and choose the things that are going to be eternal, like investing in my marriage and investing in my children, investing in my health, so I can have longevity to have impact and be available, and hopefully live a full life. And so you think about those things amongst others. And so, but certainly keep going no matter what has helped me, I think, in key times, have a level of tenacity and level of commitment, to push through, to continue to move forward in life, even when things haven't gone my way. And so, people assume because my uncle was quote unquote a billionaire, which is not exactly accurate, but I try not to get too down that rabbit. He had $1 billion business. He himself was not a billionaire, but nonetheless, he was certainly died a very wealthy man.
Right.
People assume I've already got it made and grew up on third base, and that's not exactly the case. I've certainly had to, been blessed with a lot of advantages, certainly, but I've also had to do, a lot for myself. And so it's been an interesting kind of holding the tension between sometimes, especially amongst African American folks, the assumptions, and the perspective, that people may assume and have based on my family, and then my lived reality and who I am. I'm not my uncle's son. I'm not him, certainly. I'm a very different person with very different gifts and skill sets. And so, kind of finding, that fit for myself, and staying true, but nonetheless having that level of tenacity to keep going no matter what certainly has fueled me on some key occasions.
No, it's definitely a good one, I say, and I feel in so many of the things that I like and enjoy, even down to music, like I like the music that feels like it's movement, it's pushing you forward. And in so many categories, when I think about where I can rally in recent years, I think about Justice Ketanji Jackson and her
Mm.
quote of persevere. It's just like there's a certain moment in time where you make a decision that you're going to do the thing. However that happens, however it goes, you say a prayer, you kind of lean on what you need to lean on, but you're deciding I'm in pursuit and the goal will be achieved. So persevering is one thing. It's interesting you mentioned that life is no crystal stair. My aunt definitely had that framed. And so,
Mhm.
there's the running jokes about the things in black households. So you have
Yeah.
you have Barack Obama, you have Martin Luther King, but there's probably going to be some sort of poem in there, and likely to be Langston Hughes. For my mom, though, on the other side, it was Hold Fast to Dreams, and
Hmm.
I always think about how the person she passed some time ago, but it was more so this pursuit of a dream. So when I think about perseverance and going for it, it was just like because she aimed high and went, and in so many ways that was modeled for me, and I continue to do that almost to the point where you reach levels and you think, okay, I'm here. So like, what am I aiming for next and next and next?
Right.
Just to kind of keep going on that pursuit because you realize you can do more and you should do more.
Mhm.
So as we round this out, I'm curious about what gives you energy because you do a lot, and so you need a lot of energy. So what kind of feeds you?
Mm. Well, as I mentioned, at the beginning, my faith certainly feeds me, and increasingly informs me, but it certainly feeds me. And as I, alluded to, when I cry me a river, I've never missed a meal or gone out in the world. But again, people might assume that I've been on easy street from day one. And again, I've certainly had a lot of advantages. I've also had a lot of challenges. I have my own journey, my own maturation, my own growth, that needed to take place and continues to take place. And that's really the journey, particularly in the Christian walk, is, we're perfected unto Christ, to our last breath, right? And so really embracing that, being self-aware, to grow and to learn, and move forward. So, my faith has certainly, I think, informed me the most, and galvanized me, and driven me to look for solutions, as my godfather would say, look for the mirror instead of the flashlight. And that's the hardest
Mhm,
thing. I think
mhm.
a lot of people want to say, well, they did it or they denied me. And I've been in some situations where, I've been denied financing under questionable circumstances, where I had at least two attorneys said I could have filed suit, but I chose not to. And so, look in the mirror, what could I have done differently? How can I mature? How can I grow? How can I learn from this experience, to move forward? I didn't go into business to sue folks. I go into business to create services that meet critical needs. And so, really having, the right mindset, certainly continually praying and being in relationship, and asking God to renew my mind and show me how I can improve, how I can be better. Certainly, I think has informed me. And again, just the idea of being a servant, understanding my assignment. Who have I been sent to serve? Again, I've been given so many advantages, and I truly believe who to whom much is given, much has been required. And I have my South Africa mug here. I'm sipping out of because I had the chance to go to South Africa and still contribute to some work that's being done there in Cape Town, and and unfortunate pandemics kept me from going back, and I hope to get back soon. And but certainly, there's a lot of places in the world where I know I can have an impact, and I'm still hoping in a lot of ways. Even though I'm a little bit older than you, I'm still feel like I'm just getting started, and also looking forward to bringing my kids along and encouraging them to increasingly do their part as they head towards adulthood. They're still a little bit ways away from that, but you can already see it coming. It goes very fast. I know you're a parent, so I'm sure you
Yes.
know that.
Oh yes. When I look at them and they were babies, they're not creeping up to 6 and such. I'm like, all right, you are now moving around with your own thoughts and feelings, and this is a new phase.
Yep,
Um,
little
and
people.
beautiful part of the journey. I'm like, all right, so now I need to adjust how I show up for you differently because you need different things.
Right.
And so with that journey and of parenting on top of life and everything else, sometimes I find myself wanting to have a little bit of a retreat. So where do I find my moments of peace? So I usually find that in music and a few other things. And I ask everybody I have join us. So I'm curious, where do you find peace, or what gives you peace? Maybe it's not a place, but a thing.
To be honest, sometimes, especially in the pandemic, and I try to do this too often, but just having a nice cigar and a nice afternoon on the back of my house on my deck is certainly sometimes been my peace. Going for a walk, and
Nice.
I think I mentioned before we began recording, my wife is now 4 years sober. And so, I'm in a amazing marriage of 9 years. We're in our 10th year now, and just celebrated 9 years. And so, not saying it's been easy, but it's been amazing because of the growth that we both have experienced. And so, that certainly has been a source of my peace, is to be able to grow with her and to watch her grow. And that's really been a catalyst. I think in kind of pinning the pandemic as kind of when her sobriety journey really began, believe it or not, and then all the way up to now, these last 4 years. Really, that's been my piece. And then certainly having a practice. And I know I've talked about my Christian faith, and what I say to people, I've said in other podcasts where I've been blessed to be interviewed, is if you have some spiritual practice. I don't know if you have no spiritual practice, I don't know how you do it. But so
Right.
taking the time to meditate, having diligence and consistency with your spiritual practice, I think is key as well. And so that's certainly somewhere where I find my peace as well. That's the source of my peace.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear you have different ways that you get it, because we all need it and we all need to find ways to kind of incorporate that into the craziness that can be everyday life.
Yes.
And so I also appreciate you sharing so much about your personal side in this origin story. So as we kind of shift gears and start to talk about mission a bit, I kept coming back to this as I thought about it, because I'm like, all right, Russell's out here. He's got his business pursuits. He's got the philanthropic pursuits. He's on boards. He's got a family. He's married. There's a lot happening here, and there must be something guiding it. So before we really appropriately address that, I'm curious, how do you define mission?
Well, I really define, mission. I always think about it usually in the context of vision, right? So vision is like almost usually like the end game, but the most important part is the journey, and that's the people you're going to serve and the growth you're going to experience, and hopefully the impact you're going to have along the way. And I think really that is the mission. So how do you define, what that looks like? Of course, vision can be around values as well, but really thinking about mission to me is really what is that, what is your goal on this journey, that's perpetual, right? It's not necessarily until you take your last breath. It's not necessarily an end game per se. It's hard for me when I hear people say, and I know I've been an entrepreneur my whole life one way or another, like when I was at GW. So I think I formed my first company 3 years before I left GW, so I was already being entrepreneurial even while I was still didn't quit my day job right away. But it's hard for me to hear people say, "Yeah, I'm going to retire," and then from the Fed or from wherever and ride it out. Like ride it out. So what are you going to do with the last like 25 to 33% of your life? You're going to ride it
Yeah.
out. Like what do you? So I just really believe that we're all of us who hear a lot of, obviously hear a lot of conversation around purpose. I prefer to think more about, at least as a Christian, what's my assignment? Who am I assigned to? And even transitioning that to a business context, who are you here to serve? Right. So obviously
Exactly.
your family's first, but then the business context or in a professional context, who are you here to serve? And what does that look like? So really, from that standpoint, is how I try to identify my mission. And certainly, the definition is a living one. It shifts. It's not the same one that it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or 5 years ago. So certainly having clarity in this what season of life you're in to understand your mission. And professionally, your life's going to change. Parenting, life's going to change. Your marriage and your spouse are going to change. You're going to change. And so, understanding mission, but then having that orientation around service, having a vision that's rooted in values, I think helps you to keep your orientation on track towards understanding your assignment and the season you're in to go towards the goal.
All right, all right. So we're definitely in the same zone. It's interesting that you say it shifts and changes over time because that's so true in my perspective. As I entered into this thinking about mission, the place I relied back to is my corporate communications training. Like
Right.
you said, you're a communicator. Once a communicator, you're always a communicator. It's in there. And how I entered it was thinking about that vision, mission, values framework. I used to teach that in communications courses when I was teaching college, but I also would work with clients on this in DEI, ESG areas where you really need to dig into what is your mission and how are you communicating that in ways that can be replicated and threaded throughout all of the things that you need to communicate. Where's the authenticity and consistency in that is where I started. But when you think about it and you shift that into a personal context, that's where you start to kind of wrestle a little bit with mission in the context of purpose. And very much aligned with your thinking. When I hit purpose, I'm thinking, this is why I'm here. And the mission is what I'm here to execute in fulfillment of that purpose. So that perpetual piece that you're talking about is so true because you're going to be doing a series of things that help you kind of fulfill that mission again and again and again to hit that higher purpose. So I'm curious if when you're in the zone and you're thinking about things, how did you get to a place of clarity in what you believe your mission to be?
Hmm. I'm not necessarily sure I'm clear on it. So I'll add to what you were just saying is that I'm an aggressive learner. So I'm constantly evaluating. I'm evaluating myself. I'm evaluating others. I'm reading. I'm listening. And I crush so many podcasts. I can't remember the last time I actually read a nonfiction book, but I'm reading. I'm reading. Like not like rather last time I read a fiction book. So, I read.
Oh,
I'll watch a movie, but the books I'm reading are leadership, faith based. Organizational strategy. Like I'm a geek on certain topics, right?
right.
Occasionally I'll read something about politics. I'll read what Obama's last book, or whatever. But that's really So I'm constantly learning and constantly seeking clarity, right? And again, and part of that goes back to my Christian faith, where I'm constantly in my prayer time asking God, okay, give me clarity on this matter right in front of me, and even going through day to day, having that relationship in faith
Hmm.
to get clarity in the spirit and understand, what I'm trying to accomplish in this moment, let alone like in this year. People want to have these year goals or, what's your 5-year plan? I'm kind of, I don't want to say like I'm living, serendipitously by the seat of my pants, but I am living a faith walk and a faith journey, right? And that's become increasingly core to who I am. I've, done so many things in business, but have not certainly hit the mark that I aspire to. And so I've had to learn in the last year or two that doing things in my own strength, out of my own source and out of my own pride is not the path. And so I'm very much been in a season, I say in the last 15 to 18 months of like transitioning to really understand and gain a level of clarity as to my mission. I feel like I'm pretty clear on my assignment because I understand my gifts and I understand humbly my ability to impact people.
Hmm.
And I've understood that from a very young age as a child even. And so, but really understanding, okay, what is the maybe I'm having it backward. I know my mission, but I'm still trying to make sure I have the right assignment. But
You know?
trying to make sure I understand, okay, what does that look like in this season for Russell Fugett? How does that really bear the most fruit in this season? So that's really kind of where I am. But there certainly is a through line through most of the work I've done in my entrepreneurial journey, most of the places I've served in my professional life and career. And so I think I've kind of always had a path, and I'm very much feel like I'm still on it and kind of gaining clarity as to how to really maximize all the gifts that God's given me.
Definitely, definitely. All right. So I'm in a place where I'm feeling very much like I need to rethink because so much of the mission and the purpose, especially growing up, is linear. You go to school, you go
Right.
to high school, you go to college, you come out into the career. I'm thankful that I came out into a career and intentionally chose one that I like, that I still like, that I was good
Good.
at.
Good.
And so I was able to kind of move on this journey. But when you think about gifts and you're talking about that, I have had moments recently where I'm thinking, okay, there are a range of gifts I have. Some I haven't explored yet. Are the ones I'm using the ones I'm supposed to use in order to complete the mission?
Mm.
And that's where I'm starting to kind of question. Okay, there's some gifts on the shelf, and am I meant to turn, or am I meant to stay? And I've been doing a little bit of reading. I was definitely in your zone for years. I read all of the business profiles,
Mm.
strategy books when I got my MBA. That's all we did.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. You were in school. Yeah. That's all you were thinking about.
So, and then I started to shift back into some of the things that I truly loved, which was really the biographies, the life stories.
Yes. Love
Um,
biography.
and so I'm in that season now, and as I'm starting to bounce that off, I'm catching a space where I'm like, oh, I want to do more of this, more of the conversations, more of unpacking life, and figuring out different ways that you can do that through story. So it's interesting. All of the books I'm reading and the audiobooks I'm listening to, they're all different life stories, and I'm
Mm.
trying to piece together. Okay, what does this season mean? What are you getting? Um, Intentionally or unintentionally pulled towards, and it's starting to have me think about different gifts. So I was always curious, out of the gifts you have, do you feel like they generally align in one direction, and you feel like that's the way you're going, or have you strategically picked some gifts over the others to kind of guide your way?
I think having been an entrepreneur, um, I think I've leveraged all the gifts, and I've had to develop some new ones to do certain things that aren't as much fun, but I had to learn how to do and become, you know, good at, to the point where sometimes I've gotten compliments for things where I'm like, really, you like that? I didn't think I was that good. Or even more, I know people who do it way better than me. I just can't afford to pay them to do it for me, so I have to do it myself. But then
Right.
people who have no baseline for the skill, like, oh, yeah, that's pretty good. I'm like, okay, thanks. So
Keep the
I think
resourcefulness.
I think I've maxed out. If I've attempted to sort of, I think max out. I don't think I've had anything where I've ignored it. I've published a book, self-published a book 6 years ago. I have a pretty good working outline for my next one, hopefully coming out in 25. And so, I think I've left it all out there so far. And that kind of goes back to why I said in the last year or two, I feel like I've been kind of reorienting myself in my faith and really understand, okay, I haven't gotten the outcome that I wanted, and certainly, kind of trying to walk into the mantle that my uncle left and my family's, as I think has been a undue sense of responsibility that I felt to live into that. So I've had to kind of step back and peel back some of the layers and say, okay, God, what are you calling Russell Fugett to do? What does that look like? I have all these great skill sets. I know so many wonderful people like you who are professional, who are connected, and that they'll actually return my emails and my texts and my phone calls. And so, okay, what do I do? How do I be? Who do I serve with this? What does it look like, right? And so, it's been an interesting season already in 2024. Just a couple months, 2.5 months into the year, where it's beginning to get revealed. Certainly.
How are you feeling about the year? Because I think now, post pandemic, everything is put in the frame of that.
Sure.
And now that it's almost, I think somebody I saw it, they said, we had to first figure out what it was, then we had to deal with it,
Right.
then we had to find our way out of it and decide, okay, are we out of it? Are we done? And now they're saying 2024 is a year for everybody to really kind of reflect on what that was, what happened just
Okay.
there, and kind of look into where we're going. And a lot of people were saying that 2020 was a rough year, hit everybody over the head, and they're kind of feeling that about 2024. And I'm trying to find every piece of wood to knock on, every Bible verse to think of at this point, that I don't feel that way this year. And maybe it's because I'm so deeply looking, searching, trying to kind of focus on the path ahead that I'm not necessarily feeling that. But I'm feeling grounded. I'm feeling good about where we can go this year. I'm curious if you have that as you're trying to, go after many pursuits. Do you feel grounded in the year, or do you feel like, man, this has been tough even in the first few months?
It's been tough in the first few months. Started out the year with a big news story on Channel 2 in Baltimore, which still has helped me get traction in a lot of conversations I've had, even just in recent days, with people in the finance world, which has been exciting for my nonprofit project, Equity Endowment, with the mission of creating an endowment to close the wealth gap. But then, about 10 days later, my mother-in-law passed away.
Mm.
And then my wife, 2 weeks after that, had an unexpected career shift as well. And so now we're both working independently. And so it's been a challenge to say, okay, what is this year meant to be? But it's allowed us, my wife and I, to really say, okay, we're in a very unique position, but we actually have a unique opportunity. And so we're already again starting to see some things kind of come into focus, but it's very much been a faith move and a faith walk because there is not clarity, right? There's not clarity in the assignment. There's not complete clarity. We have things revealing themselves day by day, week by
Right.
week, quite literally week by week, probably more accurately. And so, there's not certainly clarity in our finances, right, for the longer term. And so, it's certainly been a stretching and a growth and a maturation of our faith, to be able to walk this out. And it's a little bit scarier for my wife, who's has such a long career in dentistry and has always been employed. For me, I've been an entrepreneur full time, with a very brief exception, for the last 14 years. And so for me, I've seen ups and downs in my bank account and my business account, and I've navigated so many different things. But nonetheless, when you're in this season of life, I'm not 25 anymore, and you have children, you have a mortgage, you have a certain lifestyle, you have certain things you want to be able to do for your family and your children. It certainly is stretching us. And so, in a way, I guess I would say I do. I guess to answer your question, I do feel grounded in this year, but I feel grounded because of my faith, not because I just closed some huge business deal and I have a bunch of money coming in or
Right.
some other success. But I feel grounded and I'm expectant, for this year to be fruitful, for myself and for my family and for this transition, that we've been in. Last year I lost my grandmother, who was also like a second mother to me, and then my uncle, my only maternal uncle, and who was also my godfather, also passed away. And so in less than 12 months, we've had three major losses between my wife and I. And so it's been a lot to process and to understand the grief and the grieving. There's a whole aspect of my business that I pretty much wound down last summer and I walked away from. And so it's been a lot of transition. But
Indeed.
certainly, again, I feel rooted for this year. I was happy for 2023 to end, even though this year so far has been a very interesting start. But I'm believing for this year to be very fruitful.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about all the loss you've experienced, and it's definitely one where when you think about the phases of life, we're in a phase where a lot of life is happening.
Yeah,
There are people entering, there's people exiting, and you start
yeah,
to think about it. I talked to some cousins that I was close to, and just reflecting because you know, one of my aunts passed. This was a few years ago, and then my mom passed around the same time, and so we're looking at each other like, oh, it's us now. We are the ones
yeah. We're the core
that are,
generation. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, we're the generation, and we're the ones that the kids will look at and be like, oh, Uncle so and so, and
yep,
so, and so that's interesting to just think about. Okay, who are we in this time? And also at the same time, I hear you talking about this year. It's like, all right, you're expectant. You've certainly sowed many seeds. You're looking for where your opportunities are to reap them. Um, but you got little ones around you, got other people around you, and to a certain extent, you think about what our parents and our grandparents and aunts and uncles, what they navigated, and we didn't know
right. Yeah,
because it was like, all right, forward. This is where we're driving, and this is where we're focusing. And so, you sound grounded, and I'm glad for that. For me, change has been interesting. It'll hit me a lot all at once, and then I level out. So I don't know if the entrepreneurial path is my next stop because I
okay,
kind of like the balance, but at the same time, I've learned to pivot when I need to.
right,
And so sometimes that is interesting when you have a bone of flexibility in you to think about, okay, where should I go? Where am I guided when you know how to navigate and how to move? So if you were to give some people guidance in terms of thinking through this year, how they might process finding their mission, what guidance would you give them?
Well, again, certainly I've encouraged people to be rooted in a spiritual practice. Number one, but number two, I think you need help, right? So to the extent if you've been in grief, or if you've been in a traumatic situation, or mental health's been a big topic coming out of the pandemic, it takes help to heal. So whether it's your spouse, whether it's your therapist, whether it's your community, but then also it takes a community, I think, to strategize. You have to have some other smart people around you, preferably some smarter people than you around you, who can help guide you, can give you advice. Some people, whether it's in your marriage, whether it's in your professional life, who are a few exits ahead of you, right, on the highway, so to speak, using that metaphor, that can really advise you and give you wise counsel, right, and instruction, and perspective. I think it's a good thing I like to say if you know your blind spots, you won't get blindsided. So you need to have, hopefully if you have a spouse or if you have other people in your friend circle, your professional circle who can help you see the blind spots, right? Help you to adjust if you need to adjust, help you to pivot if you need to pivot, and help you, make suggestions, and make connections as well to the extent that's useful and helpful. I certainly think that's the strategy. No one does it by themselves, and if they told you they do, they're lying, or they're delusional. It really does take a team, and likewise, to the extent you're able to contribute to people in the same way yourself can help inform your thinking, right? I definitely encourage people always to think about having people who are ahead of you, but also reach back. Like we're in that generation, reach back to the people who are in the young millennial or Gen Z cohort. How can we support them? And I think
Exactly.
that's how you build that connectivity, and that perspective, and get different perspectives, and get different connectivity to finding to finding your mission, to finding your assignment, right? To finding your people, if you will. And so that's certainly, I think, the approach that I have. And again, being an aggressive learner is the last thing I have. If you want to learn how to do something, or you want to improve something, there's a book, there's a podcast. Is really, we live in an information age
Right.
here, at least here in the West, but most of the world, whether you have access to the internet, there's really no excuse if you want to learn something to take the time and invest in yourself to grow in that way.
Well, thank you for that guidance. And you mentioned it briefly, but I would love if you could share with us a little bit about Equity Endowment and how, if we wanted to support you in that mission, we might be able to do so.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So founded Equity Endowment in beginning of 2023 after kind of an exploratory phase in 2022. The mission is to close the wealth gap by creating an endowment. So I'm sure many of your listeners will be familiar with an endowment, like a college university would have an
Right.
endowment, right? They'll raise a fund. The principal can't be touched, but they'll, use the stock market on average grows about 10% a year, or an investment portfolio. Maybe besides the stock market, could be real estate, could be venture capital, private equity. And they would take the proceeds of that endowment and pay for faculty salaries, pay for buildings, et cetera, athletics, whatever. And so similarly, we want to create an endowment, a community asset to close the wealth gap. My grandmother always told us we live in an ownership society, and ownership means having assets, right? In order to
Right.
have assets, you have to have access to capital. So our idea is we do create an endowment fund. Our initial goal is to raise a $50 million fund as a 501c3 public charity, and invest that fund with minority fund managers, black and brown fund managers. There's an article in TechCrunch in October of 2023 that said, I think it was like 0.23% of venture capital dollars were invested in funds owned and operated by African Americans.
Right.
Not 1%, not 2%, point like 2-3%.
It's such a small
So,
number.
which is yeah, so it's literally less than a penny on the dollar is in the hands of African American venture capitalists. And then we know that African American and minority venture capitalists tend to invest in minority businesses. We know what the deals are, right? In our community.
Right.
And people say the global majority and soon the American majority is going to reflect that community. So it makes good business sense in this way to invest that way. But in that way, so our fund will be injecting millions of dollars into our economy that way. And then we'll take the proceeds of that endowment and we'll grant it to nonprofits doing programmatic work to close the wealth gap, with emphasis on entrepreneurial enablement and new business creation. And so it's a sustainable two-pronged strategy at the intersection of finance and philanthropy to close the wealth gap. And so I'm been blessed to have a lot of interest. Right now, I'm actively looking for thought partners and sponsors. Hoping to raise $250,000 or $500,000 to really operate, stand this up, maybe hire a couple folks, get a better website, do some of those things, and we'll be able to have a really aggressive 24-month fundraising campaign to raise this initial fund. But I've not identified anyone else who's doing it. If they are, I'd love to talk to you, because this is bigger than me. This is something I really feel called to do, and it's not about keeping this is my secret sauce. I'm really mission oriented. And I had someone I had lunch with last year say, well, why would you tell people about your approach and your strategy? What if someone takes it? I said, well, I hope someone takes it. We need 20 of these funds. We need 50 of these funds. That this kind of approach would be great. I don't need to be the only one that does it. Let someone else do it and put together a different financial portfolio or approach that does a similar thing. We need access to capital in our economy. We need to build community. We need to collaborate. We need to have community assets that can drive economic growth. Yeah, again, for Black and Brown Americans, but for all Americans, is really going to have an impact maybe not so much in our generation, but for our children's generation, generations to follow. This is an intergenerational issue that obviously has deep roots in slavery, has deep roots in the genocide of Native Americans, and so many other things that happened to Asian and Hispanic Americans here. We have, as Americans, we have a responsibility, have an opportunity in this
Right.
time to do something different. And of course, government has its role to play, but so does private sector, and so does private community. And some of the best solutions that come in government often come when someone in the business community or the private sector does it first. And so we're just getting started, but I really believe in this and committed to it. And again, it's bigger than me. Like I said earlier, I haven't missed any meals. I have a roof over my head. You know, sure I want to do well and do good, but it's really bigger than me. And so I'm really excited about it. You can go to equityendowment.org. We are currently fiscally sponsored by the Players Philanthropy Fund, so we are able to take tax deductible donations. You can click the contribute button there and make a donation. If you want to make a $1,000 or more donation, you can find my contact information there. Again, it's equityendowment.org. I'm happy to give you the instructions for the wire transfer, so we eliminate all the fees from the credit cards if you go through our portal there. But otherwise, click contribute. There's no amount too big or too small. And I really, thank you for considering it and being a part of this mission and this vision.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that and giving this perspective. Um, I mean, I know you said you're kind of finding your way and consistently thinking through, okay, what is that mission? This seems like a pretty big part of it for this season. So I definitely will be looking at how I can support myself with that
Thank
as
you.
well. As we round out the conversation, I just wanted to see if you had one quick point on mission that you could leave us with, what would it be?
One quick point on mission. I think understanding, being the healthiest and the most whole person that you are allows you to have the maximum impact and truly accomplish and achieve your mission. So being self-aware, investing in yourself, your own rest, your own mental health, physical health, your own family's health. I think from that foundation, you have a great chance of succeeding in your mission. And then again, having a spiritual practice that enables that and fuels that as well will help you to when there are dark times, when there are difficult times, when there's challenges, you'll be able to keep going no matter what.
Russell, thank you.
Thank you, James. Again, let's do it again in 10 years.
Hey, less than 10 years. Less than 10 years. All right. Well, thank you again.
Thanks for having me, James. Anytime. Happy to do it.